Hello to all of the members of the class of 2020, graduating from high school, graduating from college. Congratulations to you. You have accomplished something in a difficult time. You have had to complete your high school and college education very often online. You've had to do it with some hardship. You've had to do it with some disappointment. I thank God for you. I thank God for your fortitude, for your doing the work, for your staying the course, as they say, for your finishing the race, as the Bible says. It has not been easy. And we thank God for you and say congratulations to you. There's a passage in the New Testament, in the Gospel according to John, where Jesus, in the 3rd chapter, where Jesus is talking to a guy named Nicodemus, who was a member of the Pharisees' party. Very well may have been a lawyer. We don't know for sure, but he probably was. Nicodemus came to Jesus and he asked him basically what must he do to find a kind of life that God intends for us all. And in the course of the conversation, Jesus talks to him about being born anew, being born from above, being born into the life of God. And then at one point in the conversation, Jesus says this, a passage often quoted in the 3rd chapter of John's Gospel, the 16th verse. Jesus looks at old Nicodemus and says to him, Nicodemus, remember this. This is the most important thing. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. God so loved the world that God's Son came into it in the first place, that God came into the world, and that God was willing to give up himself, his own life. God so loved the world. In those simple words, God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, there is about the best definition of love that I have ever seen. God so loved the world, not that he took, not that he hoarded for himself, not that he did it for himself. God so loved the world that he gave, even to the point of sacrifice. That very often is what love looks like. St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 13, in that famous love passage, where he says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, in that whole passage, at one point in the middle of it, he says, love is not jealous, love is not rude, love is not boastful, love does not insist on its own way. All of that as a way of saying love is not selfish. Love is the opposite of selfishness. Love is the cure for selfishness. Love very often is sacrificial. Love seeks the good and the welfare and the well-being of others as well as the self, but of others as well. It's not selfish. It's inclusive. It's expansive. It makes room for others. God so loved the world, not that he took, but that he gave. There's another passage in 1 John chapter 4 that says, beloved, let us love one another because love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Then the passage goes on and says, God's love was revealed in this way. God sent his only Son into the world that we might live through him. And this is love. Not that we loved God, but that God loved us and gave himself, his Son, as a sacrifice. Love is not jealous or rude or boastful. It's not selfish. Love seeks the good and the well-being of others as well as the self. Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, love God, love your neighbor, and love yourself. I was listening on Mother's Day. I was at home, and my wife and I were going to church on television, which many of us do. And so we went to St. Stephen's Church in Oxford, and we're watching on Facebook. And I was able to mirror it onto the TV screen so we could both see it. And it happened to be, it's on Mother's Day at St. Stephen's Church in Oxford for many years. It's also Youth Sunday. And usually a young person delivers the sermon. And yesterday, a young man gave the sermon, and it was a beautiful sermon. And at one point, he talked about this being a strange graduation for him, graduating from high school. He said, this has been a strange school year. And he said, we had to give up a lot. We didn't have our prom, and we won't have the same graduation ceremony. And then he said, but if by giving up my prom and graduation ceremony, I help to make sure that my grandparents don't get sick, and the grandparents and parents and families of others don't get sick, if that will help, then it's worth it. That's love. Love is not jealous or rude or boastful. Love makes room and space and seeks the good and the welfare of others. When I was younger, a number of years ago, my father had a stroke. And we went to the hospital and saw him in the hospital after surgery. And he lived for a number of years after that. But after the surgery, I was in the ICU unit, intensive care unit, with my Aunt Carrie, who was one of his sisters. And so the two of us were standing there at the bed, and she pulled the sheets back, and she started rubbing his legs. And I didn't know why she was, rubbing his legs. She started singing, songs, religious songs, Amazing Grace, and, There Is a Balm in Gilead. And she was rubbing his legs, and I asked her what she was doing. And she replied, well, this is what Mama used to do when he was a little boy. And I said, well, why did she rub his legs? She said, she would rub his legs and she would sing hymns almost every night. I said, why did she do that? And she looked at me and she said, you didn't know? And I said, didn't know what? She said, your father had polio when he was a little boy. And then it made sense. I didn't know that he had polio, but I knew that he walked with a limp. And then something else made sense. I remember when I was in elementary school, and we were supposed to get vaccinations. And I remember they had a little sugar cube, and it had some medicine on it, and we ate it. We all lined up, and they just gave us this little sugar cube with this medicine on it. And I remember when I got home, Daddy asked me, did I get my sugar cube? And I said, yeah, I got the sugar cube. And he was very happy about that. And I remember that because it just seemed strange. Why would he, what's the big deal about a sugar cube? And that day when we were in the hospital room and I learned that he had had polio as a child, I knew why he was happy that his son and his daughter had the sugar cube. Because on that sugar cube was the oral vaccine for polio, which didn't exist when my father was a little boy. But in the 1950s, a man named Jonas Salk And another one named Albert Sabin sacrificed a lot of their time doing the research and often not getting the credit for creating and making the vaccines that would prevent polio. And because they sacrificed time and energy in years of their lives, polio had been eliminated from the face of the earth. The COVID-19 virus will one day be conquered, whether by vaccine or by our containment and mitigation, whatever. It will be overcome as we together make our sacrifices, staying 6 feet apart from each other, wearing masks in public, doing what the public health officials tell us to do, finding ways to live our lives in ways that protect other people's lives, praying for scientists and doctors and medical folk and police officers and firefighters and grocery store clerks and pharmacy technicians, praying for folk who are working on the farms, who are growing the crops, praying for each other and caring for each other and living unselfish lives. We will defeat COVID-19 by the power of our collective love and will to do so. You will never forget your graduation this year. And may this graduation class of 2020, be a dedication to living the way of love, the way of unselfish living, following in the footsteps of Jesus, seeking the good, the well-being of others as well as yourself. God love you. God bless you. May God hold each one of you and all of us in those almighty hands of love.